Hi, I'm Guy Powell, and welcome to the next episode of the Backstory on the Shroud of Turin. If you haven't already done so, please visit guypowell.com and sign up for more episodes. I am the author of the upcoming book, The Only Witness, a historical fiction tracing a possible history of the Shroud of Turin over the last 2 millennia. Today, we'll be speaking with Matt Collins. He's a Christian apologist and a student of the Shroud. We'll be talking about Christian apologetics and how it relates to the Shroud of Turin, and how Matt has now started up a whole new ministry around that. Matt, welcome.
Guy, I want to tell you that I'm thrilled to be on your podcast. You've had some, what I consider people that are rock stars in the field of Shroud research. You've had Barry Schwartz, who was a member of STIRP. He's very, very famous Shroudy. You've had Russ Brialt. You've had Joe Marino, who's been probably the leading researcher on the issue of the carbon-14 testing. So I'm thrilled to be included in that group. Thanks for the invite.
Well, absolutely. And, and you impressed me so much when you were talking about the project that you're working on, and I don't want to steal your thunder, so I won't tell what's going on. But Russ Brialt, he is, as you mentioned, one of the top researchers and top knowledgeable people on the Shroud, and a great speaker. And he's the one that introduced us, and really appreciate that from Russ. And so you definitely will fit in. And as we're talking, when we're talking about the Shroud and then the project that you're working on, and this new topic of, new to me anyway, of the topic of Christian apologetics, I think it'll be fantastic. So, well, let me break from there, and let me tell you the folks a little bit more about yourself. You're a native of Georgia for the last 50 plus years. You've got a BBA from the University of Georgia. Love the Bulldogs. Both of my kids went there. Yours was in entrepreneurship, so go Dogs. You've worked in a handful of fields, including hospital administration, financial consulting. And then lastly, and without stealing your thunder, you have just made a very big investment in the study of the Shroud, and I have to commend you for that. And of course, you're a member of the Trinity Church in Sharpsburg, Georgia. So with that, welcome. And so why don't you tell us a little bit about your backstory on how you got involved in the Shroud of Turin?
Well, like a lot of people, I don't remember exactly the first time I heard about the Shroud of Turin. It would have been a television show back in the 80s. And the first time that I was ever exposed to the Shroud, I was fascinated by it. So I was an immediate Shroudie from the beginning. And for the audience's benefit, let's define what a Shroudie is. A Shroudie is a person who is fascinated with and who believes there's a high probability that the Shroud of Turin is the authentic death garment of our Lord Jesus Christ. So I've always kind of believed that it was an authentic Christian artifact. And that interest has grown over the years. And so it's really just in the last year or two, God, I would say, the answer is, well, how did you get to this point? And I would say that God put me up to it. And he put the idea in my head to create a 3D, a sculpture of Jesus Christ from the Shroud of Turin. And so that's what we've been able to do, is take an extracted image from the Shroud of Turin. And we can get into that a little bit more detail later in the conversation. But I headed up an artistic team here in Atlanta, Georgia, and we created a life-size sculpture of Jesus. There are only two that are similar in the world. Those two would be in Turin, Italy. But in the United States of America, we have just created recently, just finished it recently, a sculpture, a 5'11" sculpture of Jesus that is absolutely stunning. It's what he looked like in real life.
Definitely, and I was incredibly impressed. I've seen a couple of your videos on it, and it is really amazing. So So what have you learned now that you've put this sculpture together? What kind of interesting things have you learned about Jesus, of course, and his death and resurrection, and just generally?
Well, I think that in showing the few people that have seen the sculpture, it's done exactly what I'd hoped. It's in your face. It tells the story of what happened to Jesus, what they did to him, and what he did for us. And there's no way of getting around what happened 2,000 years ago, and that is that he was brutally executed. And the sculpture shows that. And it also shows the beauty of the man, because he was an absolutely, he was a stunning figure. And we know exactly through the sculpture, we were able to know through the Shroud of Turin image, we're able to know exactly what he looked like. And he's breathtaking.
Yeah, and and I will admit that there's a couple of things that come out. First of all, I agree with you; it is breathtaking, and second of all, that image is able to be found through the study of the shroud and the 3D image that kind of comes off of this 2D piece of cloth, and then to be able to turn that into an actual body.
Sorry to interrupt, but what they were able to do back in the 70s. They used a piece of NASA technology. It's called a VP8 analyzer. It's really just an analog computer. And you feed an image into that computer, and NASA used it to predict what the image, what the surface of the moon and Mars were going to look like. And if you or I were to insert a photograph of ourselves into that computer, it would come out a lot of nothing, basically. If you feed the image, a picture of the Shroud of Turin, into the analyzer, it comes out a perfect 3D image, so to speak, of what Jesus looked like, which is just kind of crazy in itself. People have known for a long time that the image on the shroud is 3D. It has a lot of people, maybe lay people, don't know that there's a front and a back to the shroud. You know, the shroud is a 14-foot long piece of linen cloth that's 3.5 feet wide. It wrapped his body. But after the resurrection, immediately after the resurrection, it left an image, a full body image, front and back. It's 3-dimensional. And the VP8 analyzer was able to take that image and turn it into something that a sculptor could create a sculpture out of, because each and every sculptor in the world uses a picture to create a sculpture. You don't sit for a bust. They use pictures. And so we took they in Italy, the researchers, were able to create a sculpture. They have actually about 2 of them in Turin. And what I was able to do was hire a fantastic team here in Atlanta. I gave them the images that I wanted to work off of, and we fused essentially the 2 that are in Turin, and we made it better. Honestly, I believe, I'm biased, of course, but I believe we have the most accurate image of Jesus Christ ever created, and here. And my goal is to get as many people's eyes on it as possible. That's the goal of my ministry. I hope ultimately also by doing that I'm going to help somebody get to heaven by seeing it. If it's just one person, then I'll consider that a home run.
Yeah, absolutely. Can't disagree with any of that. So did you have then a VP8 image of the whole body, or did you have the face, or how did you put all that together?
The 2 sculptures that were created that are in museums in Italy, and that really was enough to do what we did. When I say we, I'm talking about my artistic team, which I headed up. Mm-hmm. And gave them direction. I'm not a sculptor myself, so what I did was hired the best sculptor that money could buy who happens to be based here in Atlanta. His name is Martin Dow. His studio is called Cherry Lion Studios. He did the Martin Luther King sculpture that's at the Gold Dome at the Georgia State Capitol, and he's magnificent. He was so he was so easy to work with, and Marty is just an incredible artist. But honestly, they couldn't have done it without me. Not that just solely the fact that I funded it, but they couldn't have done it without a bunch of direction. And so I gave them the direction that they needed, and they hit a home run with it. Guys, they just did a magnificent job with it.
Yeah, I'm so excited about being able to see it here, and as a matter of fact, prior to the starting of this interview, we were talking about a follow-on interview where we actually go on site and look at and film and talk to you and go through all of the details that are on this sculpture of the body of Jesus Christ. So tell us some of the marks that are on the body that you put into the sculpture.
Well, the ones that are the eye poppers are going to be the marks on his arms and legs where the scourge happened, where they ripped his skin off essentially with hooks, which is basically a whip with hooks on it. And I actually have a replica of one of those. And so my exhibit, and that's what it is. I haven't really decided whether it's going to be, where I'm going to call it a shroud exhibit or a passion exhibit. It's both of those things. And so I have the sculpture, but I also have replicas of the shroud itself, the linen replicas, but other items like the Roman flagrum, which we just alluded to. I've got a leather pouch with 30 pieces of silver that's obviously passion related. I'm working on a cap of thorns, because obviously if you look at the stains on the shroud, the blood stains, it wasn't a crown of thorns, it was a cap or a helmet of thorns. And we're working on that. And we've got some other items in there of interest that I think people will be excited to see. And I think it will be something that is very moving to a lot of people.
Yeah, and I like that you have a handful of other pieces that go with it. So upcoming, the cap of thorns or crown of thorns, you've got then the flagrum, and I really like your point about the 30 pieces of silver. That's just phenomenal. That's a really good set of things that go around the whole passion of Jesus, and so that's pretty good.
I felt like the more things that we had for the exhibit, the better. The idea of the exhibit is to be mobile. So I actually drive around in my station wagon with the body of Christ, with the Son of Man in my car, and it's really obviously an honor. But the idea that I came up with is to have a mobile exhibit that can be left at a church, or really some other places as well, museums, that they could maybe keep it for a week or 2 weeks or however long they wanted to keep it, and get as many people there as possible. As far as me being a speaker, I'm no Russ Brialt, who Russ is my friend and mentor, and lives in Georgia, but he gets called all over the United States and other places, even the Bible Museum in Washington, D.C. He is one of the leading experts in the world on the Shroud of Turin. And there are quite a few people that are experts on the Shroud and do speak at churches and other places. But where I've broken new ground, so to speak, is the fact that I've got the sculpture, I've got the body, and nobody else has, I guess you could say, thought of that. But I think that people are visual, and the shroud itself, the image on the shroud on the cloth, is very faint. And there's a lot of noise in there. When I say noise, I'm talking about, burns, marks from the 3 fires that have happened over the years. And it's it's not easy to see the image of Christ on the actual shroud, but it's really easy to look at the sculpture and
Hmm.
see it. And it's there's no way around the factual things that happen to Christ when you see the sculpture. And I want to get as many people in the Southeast, because again, I'm mobile, but I'm really just thinking in terms of the states in Georgia and the states around us. And I'm willing to go anywhere that a pastor or a board of trustees
Yeah.
that want me,
Yeah.
and speak if they want me to speak. But as in terms of the mobile exhibit, I don't actually have to speak. They could keep the exhibit themselves, and it just depends.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think the other thing that you have on the body, on the sculpture, is the scars. And I even in my book, when you think about Apostle Thomas saying, "I won't believe unless I can stick my fingers in the wounds," and then Jesus, of course, responds with the "Blessed are those that believe and do not see." And so tell us about the scars, in addition to the one in his chest. Tell us about some of those, some of
You're
the things there you've done.
pointing about Christian apologetics, and I consider myself a Christian apologist. I've always loved that particular field, and because it's interesting. And when I want to stress that, the quote you made about that Jesus said to Thomas, he said that people that don't need proof are blessed, but he didn't say that people that need proof are not blessed.
Hmm.
And if you take a look at some of the things that Paul and Peter and said, and is that we need to be good at defending our faith. And because not everybody is going to have that kind of belief without seeing strength of faith. So, and we all know people that are sitting on the fence and need some extra boosters to their faith. And a lot of that is visual. Certainly it was with Thomas. He said, I want to see it. I want to stick my finger in it. And we're talking, of course, about the gaping hole in his chest, which we, of course, illustrate very nicely on the sculpture, where his heart was pierced and by the Roman soldier with a spear. And I think that apologetics is important. We talked earlier about C.S. Lewis. I love C.S. Lewis. Mere Christianity is a book that everybody should read. It's kind of like the Bible of Christian apologetics. But we should all be better at defending the faith, because that's where we get into the Great Commission and being able to go out and have our lips moving about our faith. We have to, if we're not talking about our faith, then we're not doing enough.
Mm. Well, and one thing where I have some trouble with apologetics versus Christian apologetics versus Christianity, to me, and I know they're different, or they should be maybe treated differently, but to me, they're almost the same. Because if I'm a Christian, to your point, I should be going out there and defending the faith, and I should be evangelizing and trying to win more people to the faith. And whereas a Christian apologetics is maybe slightly different from that. So tell us how you see the difference or not there.
Great point, Guy. And what you're asking is a question I don't hear asked very often, and it should be asked. Well, what is the difference between Christian apologetics and evangelism? And the answer is very, very little. Because if you're a Christian apologist, then you're going to get up and verbalize some different elements of what we consider to be proof. Okay, that's what secular people or atheists are always asking for. Show me the proof. Show me some proof. Talk about the proof. Well, that's when you get into a Christian apologetics. But anytime you delve off into your own personal faith in a discussion like that, in a conversation like that, then you've moved over into evangelism. And so back and forth. And if you're talking about your faith, and then you get into if the conversation goes into anything that's considered an element of proof, then you're into apologetics. So there's very little. You're splitting hairs almost in the two, and a lot of people don't know that, don't think about that, and I think a lot of people are turned off in some ways by apologetics. They think that it's arguing maybe, and certainly people are turned off by the word Christian evangelist or evangelical.
Yeah.
A lot of people that are secular, or a lot of people that are that aren't secular, that are Christians, run from that word.
Yeah, I think you're right, and even run from the
not
word
proselytizing. Not a good thing. I mean, we're expected to share our faith, and when you're doing that, you're being evangelical, whichever way you want to say it.
Yeah. Well, we had one of my pastors at our church, and as a Methodist, we get a lot of changes in pastors. And one of them, Jonathan Holstein, he was just phenomenal. But at the benediction, he would say, "Go out and be the best image of Christianity that you can be." And I always thought of that as being, you can show yourself as a Christian, you can act as a Christian, and through that, you are evangelizing. Without necessarily, trying to aggressively convert somebody. You are, somewhat, maybe not, certainly a little bit actively, certainly very passively, but you are showing what a Christian, actually looks like and what the image of a Christian could be. And by doing that, showing them the best image or the best picture of what a Christian can be, to then help to win people to the faith. And I like your point too about the Christians that might be on the fence, or I guess the non-Christians or the secular ones that are kind of on the fence. They fall off one way or they fall off another way, depending on different circumstances. And I think then that apologetics might be able to help. Evangelism, maybe not, but then being the best picture of a Christian can certainly also support all of that.
I think lips that are moving are very important. And yeah, you can show people with your actions, but lips moving are critical. My friend, Dr. Mark Anthony, is always telling us that he wants us to go out and be talkative to people in the community and sharing our faith verbally. And I think that it's critical to do that. There are some churches that are more about, well, go and invite people and bring them in, and we'll do the talking. I think it's better for us to do the talking, and I go to a church that believes that, and I think that it's very, very important for us to be out there and be able to defend our faith and explain our faith and also show them.
Yeah. So you got into Christian apologetics. Tell us about how you got into that. What's been your backstory on Christian apologetics and some of the people that you've been talking with and learning from?
The guy that the Christian apologist that I think is probably the most famous in the United States would be Dr. Frank Turek. I use a lot of his content for study and have been doing so for close to 10 years, maybe. The only Christian class that I've taken is from Dr. Gary Habermas, who is considered, he's at Liberty University, and he's considered the leading expert, scholarly expert, and that usually means a Christian professor. But his specialty is the resurrection. And so he's written, of course, a ton of books, and Gary is just a phenomenal teacher. So I took his class on the resurrection because of what I'm doing and starting a ministry. I certainly wanted to have at least some academic background. I've got a BBA from UGA, and that has nothing to do with religion, but I do love to study our faith and try to get better at explaining. That's the whole point of it for me, is to be able to be more knowledgeable and to provide more clarity to people about the factual stuff that happened in our faith over the last 2,000 years. I mean, Jesus came down to this earth and honestly, for 2,000 years, people haven't been able to quit talking about him. He's the most fascinating and most controversial person that's ever walked the earth. Christian apologetics is controversial. The Shroud, honestly, Guy, is very controversial. We need to talk about that for a minute. I don't mind talking about subjects that are controversial, and the Shroud in particular can get people, I think pastors in particular, shy away from the subject. And it's, I'd like to do something about that. One other goal that I have in my ministry is to not only shed some light on, more light on the Shroud and the facts behind it, but also open it up to a new generation, because I believe that the younger generation knows pretty much nothing about the Shroud, believe it or not. You know, millions and millions of people know about the Shroud and are Shroudies, so to speak. But the younger crowd, I don't think they do know much about it.
Yeah. I think you're right, and I think, yeah, and I think that'd be really good for the for all of our ministries as being Shroudies, is to bring the Shroud. And I do like your point that, Jesus did say, blessed are those who do not see and believe, but he also did not say that they're not blessed if you see and then believe. So and that's maybe what the Shroud can help to do to promote Christianity into the world. Now, you said Dr. Gary Habermas is an expert on the resurrection. How does that fit in with your ministry, and then the commissioning of this sculpture? How do you see all of those coming together?
Well, Gary is certainly considered the leading expert for the resurrection, but certainly expert on Jesus in particular. As a matter of fact, he's writing his magnum opus right now, a 5,000-page volume on the resurrection. And I hope, Gary, would you please hurry up and finish that? I'm dying to read it.
It's hard. I'm writing my book, and it's hard. So
But he's been a big help to me in terms of being an apologist, because he's brought up a lot of points that, of course, that I didn't know. One of which is the fact that only a year or two after the cross, Christians were reciting various creeds, which basically explain exactly what they thought happened, what they believed that some of course, a lot of them actually were witnesses to. And they wanted to, since there was nothing written down, then they had to just be able to recite it, as in like in spoken word. Or certainly the most famous creed as a Methodist, when I was growing up as a Methodist, we always recited, I guess every Methodist congregation does, the Apostles' Creed.
Right.
And but Gary shed a lot of light for me on things like that, things that are good proof of the fact that Jesus was a real person, and the fact that he died and was brought back to life.
Yeah. So I want to go back to one other topic too that you mentioned, which is the Shroud, how controversial the Shroud is, and that there definitely seems to be at least two major camps. There are the Shroudies, I guess, that believe that there's with a very high probability that it is authentic, the authentic burial cloth of Jesus. And then there's the anti, or the anti-Shroudists that believe that no, it's definitely not, and the carbon-14 dating and a handful of other things are proof that it's not. And then I guess there's maybe a third group, and a friend of mine is that way. She's Christian, and yet she says, well, I'm really not that sure that it is. And so her probability is maybe down in the 5 or 10%, whereas, mine might be in the 90, 95, 99% of it being authentic. How do you kind of see that?
Let's back up to when in the Western Europe, when the Shroud emerged, because the Shroud's always been controversial. The carbon-14 dating happened in 1988, and that certainly damaged the Shroud's reputation in a big way. But the shroud was controversial from really the beginning. Now, you have written a fascinating book that I think is groundbreaking to try to imagine what happened from 2,000 years ago to when the shroud emerged in Western Europe. And that's very important. And it's something that skeptics bring up all the time. Well, where was the shroud for 1,200 years before the emergence in France or wherever it was? But getting back to my point, when the shroud emerged in Western Europe, it was immediately denounced by a few people as being fake. So it's always been controversial. Now, one thing that's not talked about enough is STIRP, and STIRP is an acronym. They put a U in there to make it easy to pronounce, but it's the Shroud of Turin Research Project. And so somehow they were the 33 American scientists were able to invite themselves over to Turin, Italy, and were able to examine the shroud for how many days was it straight?
120 hours, 5 days straight.
Straight. Include. So they had night shifts or whatever, but they had a shipping container taken over of scientific tools, and every test that could possibly be that they could put on the shroud was done back in the 70s. Was it 1978?
Yep.
And their intent was to figure out how in the world that image got on that cloth, and they came back with a lot more questions than they went over there with. And the answer is that it is totally, completely unexplainable. They did rule out the fact that some people think that there was an artist that did it in France, because it would be really easy to essentially to tell whether that happened or not, whether it had been painted on or whether there would have been some other method of getting the image on there. Most people that have done a deep dive into the image itself, just by looking at pictures, can sense that is very, very far-fetched. I don't personally have enough faith to believe that a man can create the image that's on that cloth. It seems ridiculous. But the carbon-14 dating in 1988, honestly, it was a sham. And a lot of people don't know that and don't want to know that. They just saw the results, heard the results on the radio or on the television or whatever, and go, oh, that proves that it wasn't authentic. I think a lot of people that are Christian that are on the rolls of a church somewhere are inclined, even if they say they believe in Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior, for whatever reason they're turned off by an image of him. They don't think for some reason that God might leave a receipt. Russ Briot likes to call it a receipt.
Yep.
I think that's a great way to describe what God did. But let's face it, in terms of controversy in general, us Christians, our faith is very controversial. Jesus Christ was the most controversial man that ever walked this earth. And our worldview in general, if you want to go back and take a look at Genesis and stuff, our worldview is very controversial. So it's ironic to me that people would be dismissive in any way of the shroud by calling it controversial when our faith is so controversial itself. And I think the idea that an artist created the shroud is honestly, I think it's incredibly far-fetched. And I don't think it's far-fetched that God would leave us a receipt for the resurrection.
Yeah. Especially when it is the core of Christianity. Without resurrection, there is no Christianity, and and that is how important it is. And to your point about Russ's leaving a receipt, I like the imagery that brings, because Jesus paid for us with his life, and then he left the shroud as here's the receipt that he paid for it. So I really like that imagery that comes up with that.
There are a lot of people in the Christian faith is obviously quite large. It's the biggest religion in the world, and there are people that believe that the resurrection was metaphorical. They don't believe necessarily in a bodily resurrection. And I think it was Paul that said, if Christ didn't really rise, then we've got no hope whatsoever. And I certainly believe that. But when what my sculpture has done, and I've seen just in the few people that have seen it, is it's such an in your face kind of thing that it's just hard to deny. And I think that there'll be obviously some people that see it and are turned off by it. I think most people are going to look at it and go, wow, this is so powerful, because there's just no way to deny what happened when you look at if you look at the injuries.
Well, and to your point as well, I mean, and you're right, I've seen the videos of it, and it is incredibly impressive, and you know, and you can feel the pain that he suffered with the scourging, and then the crown or cap of thorns, and the nails going through the hands or wrists and the feet. You know, you can just feel that pain there. And yet on the other hand, that is such an important image, because that is, you know, that was his payment. You know, that's how he paid for, you know, for our sins, so that through that pain and then through the resurrection.
He was the ransom. But when you look at the sculpture, you know, two thoughts go through your head, at least they go through mine. And one is a bunch of anger at what they did to him, because he was brutally executed, beaten to death. And the other is this amazing grace of what he did for us. And it's just really, it's overpowering to think about it. And what's so powerful about the sculpture, what's so important about the sculpture, and I think about the ministry that I've created, is there's no way of getting around it when you see him, when you see that.
Well, and I think you, in the sculpture, you have captured that grace, you know, especially in the face, you know, and when you look at that, it's just, yeah, I don't know. And sometimes to me, my mind can't even comprehend, because, you know, you look at the face and the body, and you look at the suffering that he went through. And then on the other hand, the joy that we have that he was resurrected. And it's kind of the two sides of the coin there, in that receipt that he paid for us. You know,
I can't wait to show the audience, your audience. You've got an incredible podcast here, and I'm excited to actually show them the sculpture, and we'll also show some of the other items in the exhibit. And I hope that some people will see the podcast and want to have it at their church.
Yeah, I think so. I hope so. One last question. So what do you think is the next big thing for the sculpture, for the shroud, for us shroudies? What do you think is the next big thing?
I would like to train a small army of people that want to show the sculpture to as many people as they can, and make a career out of it. And so I've got the ability to make copies of the sculpture, and I've certainly got the ability to train people as to how to create a mobile exhibit. I can only be in one place at a time, and I think that it's very, very important to get the story out. Obviously, the shroud is one of the most talked about and studied Christian artifacts in the world, but there's still so much to be done. There's still so much, honestly, disinformation to debunk, because the carbon-14 testing has been debunked, but nobody knows that yet.
Yeah.
I mean, Dr. Marino's book is fascinating. It's 800 pages. Nobody, I say nobody, I've certainly bought the book and I'm going through it, but 800 pages is a lot of info. I'll just tell the audience right now that the carbon-14 testing was bogus. It's not accurate. And there are a bunch of different reasons for that. So don't let that controversy, if you want to call it that, keep you from digging a little bit deeper. And we want to help people dig deeper, and we want to help people grow their faith, and we hope to just strengthen the faith of some people that are sitting on the fence, and maybe convert some people who are secular. I don't know. if I help one person through the sculpture get to heaven, then I'll be thrilled.
Well, I'm all there to support you. That's for sure.
I just really appreciate you having me on the show.
Yeah.
Because to be considered in the same league in a sense as Barry Schwartz, as Russ Brialt, as Joe Marino, that's very, very exciting and important to me. I think it's going to be very helpful to my ministry.
Oh,
so
yeah, absolutely. And I think you're right. And what you've already accomplished is so much, and what you've and the time and the effort and the money and the whatever that you've invested into what you've done, and then your vision for the future. I think it's going to help out all of us, not just in terms of promoting the Shroud, but that's really a minor piece of promoting Jesus Christ as our Savior and Redeemer. So
the books need to be moving.
Yeah.
So that's my intent.
Yep, absolutely. Well, with that, Matt, I really, really want to thank you. And you are in the process of putting together some ways to reach out to you at the moment. For this one, if you would go to guypowell.com, and we'll figure out a way to get a connection over to Matt, so that you can find out more about his sculpture and about his ministry and some of the really awesome things that he's doing. And so with that, thank you again, Matt. And otherwise, please stay tuned for many other videos in this series of the backstory on the Shroud of Turin. Please visit guypowell.com for more information on Matt and his sculpture. And if you like this podcast, please rate it with 5 stars.
I'm loving the book, by the way, Guy. And thanks again.
Thank you. I'm glad you got a chance to read one of the early copies. It's getting close. It's getting close.